A Russian scientist working at Harvard has now been charged with smuggling not drugs, not weapons, not people, but rather frog embryos. With that reportedly being among the samples that she had in her luggage when she landed in Boston on February 16th. Right, so her name is Ksenia Petrova, and these samples, she reportedly hoped that they would aid her research aimed at slowing aging, fighting diseases like Alzheimer's and cancer, and ultimately helping people live longer, healthier lives. With her boss, who's actually the one who asked her to pick up the samples from colleagues in Paris, saying that she was spectacular and the best he'd ever seen in 20 years at Harvard. But as she admitted, she failed to properly declare the samples to customs when returning to the US. Now, a big thing is that normally this is a pretty minor offense. It's punishable with a fine of up to $500. But as you're probably aware, because you're alive and have eyes and ears, normal doesn't really feel like it's on the menu anymore. And so what she ended up seeing was the customs official canceling her visa on the spot and beginning deportation proceedings. With then the scientist telling the official that she had fled Russia after protesting the invasion of Ukraine and that she feared being arrested or killed if she went back. And so instead of being sent off, they were like, okay, understand your situation. You're going to go to a detention center in Louisiana while we figure out what to do with you. And that is where she's been for the past 3 months, all while without ever being charged with any crime. That is until now, because this week you had her lawyers pleading her case in the United States District Court in Vermont. And there you had Chief Judge Christina Rice telling the court that she had reviewed the statute laying out the grounds for customs officers to find someone inadmissible to the country and that she didn't, quote, see anything about customs violations. But they're then asking the government's lawyers, where is that authority? Where does a Customs and Border Patrol officer have the authority on his or her own to revoke a visa? It's got to be somewhere because there is no way that person has kind of an unlimited determination. Then the attorney representing the Department of Justice saying it's the Secretary of State's authority to cancel a visa and that the Secretary has delegated that authority to customs officials. With them then also arguing that the court in Vermont had no jurisdiction over Ksenia's detention and claiming that she could challenge it, but only in an immigration court in Louisiana where ICE was holding her. But then the judge replying, but she is only detained there because you moved her. And notably, all of this is the attorney also confirmed that the administration does intend to send her back to Russia despite the dangers that she might face there. And so with that, you had Judge Rice scheduling a bail hearing for Ksenia later this month, apparently setting the stage for her release, with her lawyer claiming that the hearing established that she was detained unlawfully. But then a huge thing is that her lawyer said that almost immediately after the hearing, they were blindsided by the unsealing of a meritless criminal complaint. In that complaint alleged that Ksenia fraudulently and knowingly imported undeclared biological specimens, including samples on slides and frog embryos and microcentrifuges, with them pointing to text messages between her and her colleagues in which she allegedly said she had no plan for carrying the samples through customs, with them also saying that before she left Russia, she worked for a genetic research center with ties to the Russian government. And so now, with all of that, she could face up to 20 years in prison and a fine of up to $250,000. And with that, you had her lawyer saying that the timing of Ksenia's transfer out of ICE custody into criminal custody is especially suspect because it happened right after the judge set a bail hearing for her release. And arguing that the smuggling charge filed 3 months after the alleged customs violation is clearly intended to make Ksenia look like a criminal to justify their efforts to deport her. Right, and with that, it is important to know that Ksenia is just one of several non-citizen academics who have been arrested or threatened with deportation recently. And one of the big things that we've noticed is that in more than one case, it's been federal judges in Vermont handing out rulings to piss off the Trump administration. Right, on April 30th, for example, Columbia student Masen Madawi, who was detained by immigration authorities during an interview for his naturalization, was released from detention. And on May 9th, Tufts doctoral student Rumesa Ozturk, who was grabbed off the streets in Somerville, Massachusetts, was released on the orders of a judge who said that her continued detention could chill the speech of the millions and millions of individuals in this country who are not citizens. Right, and with that, unlike them and many others, Ksenia's case stands out because she hasn't been accused of publicly protesting against Israel's killing of civilians in Gaza. But still, you have people like the Attorney General of Massachusetts saying that it is part of the same pattern, with a writing in an amicus brief that these detentions represented the reckless and cruel misuse of power to punish and terrorize non-citizen members of the academic community. Right, and this is you have people pointing to the fact that this particular research is employed at Harvard, which notably is the school that Trump has clashed with more than any other. And actually, to that point, just this week, you had the administration canceling an additional $450 million in grants for Harvard University, with them accusing the school of not resolving what they called the pervasive race discrimination and anti-Semitic harassment that they described as plaguing the campus. And of course, that is on top of the $2.2 billion that the administration had already frozen after Harvard rejected a list of the government's demands, which is also in addition to Trump piling on the pressure by repeatedly threatening to revoke the school's tax-exempt status. Of course, what you've seen is Harvard not backing down and suing the administration over the funding freeze, with them calling out Trump's administration, saying that the actions are an unconstitutional attempt to curb academic freedom and speech. And actually, we've now seen Harvard adding to the lawsuit in light of the latest cuts, with the amended complaint claiming that the government had doubled down on its tactics as it ratcheted up funding cuts, investigations, and threats that will hurt students from every state in the country and around the world. And then also with that, you had Harvard making moves to get by without federal money and announcing today that it's setting aside $250 million of its own funds to support critical research impacted by the Trump administration's freeze. And then on top of that, we're seeing things like Harvard's president, Alan Garber, taking a 25% pay cut this fiscal year beginning in in July. With them also not alone, because you had 90 tenured professors pledging to take 10% pay cuts to help the university withstand the Trump administration's attacks. Also, with this, there's a bit of news that I think I could tie to this, because if the university is looking for a little extra cash, they may have just found some. And that because we've now learned that the school bought a copy of the Magna Carta after World War II for $27.50, with it then turning out to be an original 1300 version that could be worth millions. In fact, in 2007, a 710-year-old version of the Magna Carta went for $21.3 million. And it turns out that the one that Harvard has, it's just been sitting in the library labeled as an unofficial copy. But it's actually one of the 7 originals that still exists from 1300. And there are 24 copies that exist from the years 1215 to 1300, or with the 1215 version being the year that it was originally issued in England, and since having been one of the most influential and important documents of all time, heavily influencing the US Constitution, for example. You know, with that, something that kind of brings this all full circle is it has words that seem kind of poetically applicable today. Saying at one point, no free man shall be seized or imprisoned or stripped of his rights or possessions or outlawed or exiled or deprived of his standing in any other way, nor will we proceed with force against him or send others to do so, except by the lawful judgment of his equals or by the law of the land. And so with that, you have experts like Nicholas Vincent, a professor of medieval history, tying it to Trump's attacks on Harvard, saying in this particular instance, we are dealing with an institution that is under direct attack from the state itself. So it's almost providential it has turned up where it has at this particular time. You know, with all that, I gotta pass the question off to you. What are your thoughts with everything that we're seeing here? Hey, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this clip from the full Philip DeFranco show. And also, a big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring our Clips channel. Turn your passion into profit over at squarespace.com/Phil, or use the QR code. Because whether you're launching a business or a lucrative side hustle, your website is your digital business card. It's the only space where you control the story, no algorithms or distractions. And with Squarespace, it's so easy because they got a ton of stunning professional templates with drag and drop editing that makes site design incredibly simple, no coding required. So get started for free at squarespace.com/Phil, or scan the QR code on screen and use code Phil for 10% off when ready to launch. Squarespace.com/Phil.